So we're here with Giles Barrow. Thank you so much
Thank you for having me.
And this project is a lot about the person behind the Curie and the story that led to the Curie being written in TA. So you write a lot about education, about schooling, and you link that to script, for example.
Yeah.
So we were wondering, what's your story around schooling? How was school like for you, living in school?
It's a question that I ask my groups a great deal to think about schooling, and so I'll often offer some of my own experiences. And they're a bit of a mix, really. One of my early experiences is realising that I wasn't going to really fit very well here in this thing called school.
In general?
In general, yeah. That this wasn't probably the place for people like me.
What do you mean by people like me?
That there was something which I believed was unusual about my engagement in schooling, which appeared to be different from so many others. Now, I don't actually think that was truly the case, but it's the meaning I made of it. And rather than get into a very disaffected or disengaged in an angry way with schooling, I became really ingenious at being able to get along with my peers whilst at the same time not doing very well at schooling.
So you did well with your colleagues?
Yeah, so it was good fun to be around. I never got bullied. I always knew how to work my way around.
Socially?
Yeah. And so I did certainly survive schooling, but I know that the classic line, "You could do better," really.
So you kind of
captured me.
Talk about that in an article. You say that something like school was fine, but just the classes were...
Oh yeah, that's right, yes. Yeah, that's right. It's the lessons that were a real pain, but yeah. And I'm aware that for some, school wasn't fine, the lessons weren't fine, and it was a deeply shaming process.
Do you think that it was fine in both areas for others? Socially and...
I see. I think some were, found an ingenious way that was similar to mine, and others found other ingenious ways, which were less amenable, really, and got themselves into some trouble. And of course, for some, they just really thrived. For some, it was a great place not just to meet friends, but to meet the hunger they had about the world as well. And so, I think when you ask me what was my experience, that's a very kind of general appraisal of myself.
We're also curious, how did that shape the way you are as an educator now, or became in time?
I think at some level there was, okay, so if I just go back and say I had a sense that I was unusual, at some secret level I knew I wasn't stupid, but that any cleverness, any intelligence I had was struggling to be recognised or expressed in a way that kind of fitted in with the school process itself. So I think what happened was I continued to have a very ambivalent relationship with being clever or being intelligent. It was something that I just keep over there.
Do you think that helps you now to see that cleverness in your trainings?
I think I have a healthy respect for people that are still coming to terms with their natural intelligence and insights. I suppose I have some empathy with what it's like not to know whether or not you can take yourself seriously. I think the other thing that can also be quite a relief for some people, particularly those who are quite striven and driven and feel they need to know it all, is as a trainer, I think that I demonstrate something about holding that very lightly. So,
how do you do that?
be very clear about the limits of what I know about. And also be very clear that often I'm just experimenting with material. I'll often offer to do a workshop with material I don't really know very well.
So that's a permission in a way.
Yes, yeah. I will on my own training programs bring material for which I have great enthusiasm for and some sense of, but want to enjoy the engagement of the group in going deeper with this.
So it's kind of learning with them.
Yes, and I used to do an awful lot of that and began to wonder whether or not I was also abrogating some responsibility as the educator. And beginning to realise how important it is at times for the educator to actually know stuff and to know it well. To have some sense of certainty around material. So what that's involved for me is beginning to really enjoy the business of teaching in addition to being able to facilitate.
So in a way that changes models of education fluently. Yeah.
Certainly starts to shape a little about expanding a purpose of what the learning encounter is about.
Talked about being a model in a way, offering a model, and in the book that you've edited with Julie Newton recently, Educational TA, an International Guide to Theory and Practice, you ask a few questions. You offer a few questions that educators should ask themselves.
Right. Okay.
So I'd like to.
Are you going to remind me of some of them?
Yeah. Ask them back, and one of them was related to models, and we were curious what were your role models as you began learning in groups.
So I think about I began my professional life as a teacher, and some of the early teachers who I worked alongside, particularly with children and adolescents, particularly with adolescents with significant difficulties, there were two or three there that remain with me today. I suppose, in TA terms, powerful parental interjects from those characters. I would nowadays refer to them to some extent as elders that I was able to lean into, and to draw wisdom from them, not necessarily always by what they were sharing consciously, but also how they managed encounters with students. So I would think one of my early imprints of my as a teacher lay in those experiences. And I think back, despite having what I said earlier about schooling, that there were two, and there was one particular teacher who touched me, who got right in. And I think this is one of the intimacies of teaching, is that it is another process, not dissimilar from some clinical process, in which the other comes right into the self, touches us in some way. And there's all sorts of risk involved in that. And I'm thinking now of a teacher that did that. And I think simultaneously, the student also contributes to that dynamic too. It's not all about them, of course. And then if I think more a little later, Trudy and I developed a really strong friendship and collaboration. And there was a time where she was also a first teacher in transactional analysis, and is someone who demonstrated how in educational TA, it's not just about teaching the drama triangle. It's how do you demonstrate transactionally, analytically in your teaching of the drama triangle.
It's something like walking the talk.
Yeah, which yet. It's a good title.
Should write a book.
Let me make a note of that. Yeah. So I don't know if that's sufficient for you.
I was thinking that in the same book, you write about something else that links a little bit with this. You say, and I quote here, that just as those training in the clinical fields undergo their own psychotherapy,
Educators
practitioners need to engage in deep reflection about what it is to inhabit the role of the educator.
Yeah.
You talk about integrating the role and the soul of the educator.
Yeah,
I really love this one. So I was wondering, I know about the clinical field because that's my area, and I'm curious, how does TA training in educational field support that?
So firstly, I need to say I will speak only about my approach to training educational practitioners. So I don't want to speak obviously on behalf of all educators here, but for the work that I do with educators, at some point in the training, I believe it's necessary to reconcile or integrate the who you are with what you do. And the who you are for me relates to what are your core motivations. And often people, what are your core motivations as an educator? And people say, oh, well, because I think I want to realise people's potential, or I really want to help them overcome difficulty, and so on and so forth. And I like to push them a little harder and ask two questions. Firstly, and what's the big deal about people realising their potential for you? Why is that such a significant thing that you would want to give your career over to it? And then they might get into, well, I believe passionately about growth. So you start to say, well, what? And what's growth lead to? Such a bland word, growth. So make it more vivid and more significant. And then and claim it as being part of you. And then my second question is, and what's happened for you that means that motivation is so important? So it's to tie it to the soil of their own experience.
And then they need to integrate that with their role.
Yes, yeah. So then and then how do you want to show up in the educational encounter that embodies that motivation and those core values? What would it mean?
Education sometimes means working within a system, so that might make it hard. The role might not only depend on the educator. Yeah,
so I see there being three areas of potential disconnect. One is this one we're talking about, where the teacher becomes disconnected from who they are. So consequently, all they're doing pretty much is technique.
Yeah.
The student or the trainee is not really working with a person. They're working with someone in a role. Yeah?
So they lose the quality of the relationship. Right?
Yeah, the quality of the relationship, and it's almost more than that. The quality of what it means to be alongside someone else's soul. Yeah, that's the first disconnect, the soul and role. The second disconnect that I'm interested in is the disconnect that we have between ourselves and our capacity to be with others within whatever community or system it is. And I think that's a disconnect that school teachers predominantly find especially difficult to reconcile. Is how can, in TA terms, how can we get a good enough contract between me, my soul and my role, in relation to this student, in relation to this particular system that I'm in. Yeah. And I think that's, for some of the training that I do, in TA training, that's a particularly important thing. But for a lot of the casework I do out in schools, it's the predominant thing. It's how can I keep my sanity working in a system like that?
How do you keep your hope? That was one of the questions for you. How do you keep your sanity and your hope?
Is that a question you're asking me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got quite a particular response to that. Over the last maybe 5 years, I've noticed a very, one could argue, a very painful recognition is that I realise that I'm not the next generation. And that's quite a thing to someone who always thought he was part of the next generation to begin to realise one isn't. There's a bit of a piece there. The reason why it relates to this is that I notice in my professional work that an awful lot of the people I'm working with are much younger than me, and increasingly school leaders are younger than me. And I've started to become quite exasperated at how it's not how it used to be. And I could feel a kind of a grumpy disposition.
And talk about distance.
Yeah, a distance. This is no longer this is no longer the country that or the land that I was occupying. These teachers and this system is so different. It's like a foreign land now. And so one option is to lose hope and just wander off. Yeah. But I've been increasingly asking, particularly younger teachers, what is it that they need from people like me? Rather than insisting that my story has to somehow fit with theirs. And one of the aches that I'm noticing in the system is for eldership, which is a concept which is not commonly used.
Mentors, in a way, again, role models?
Yes, and there's a qualitative difference in the word eldership. And what I suppose my hope now is to work with senior teachers in a way they can provide eldership within the system.
What do you think it is?
Eldership?
Yeah,
what is
do you
eldership?
think it provides?
I think
something extra.
Yeah, I do. I think there are at least 3 arenas of operation. One is how to engage in followership, how to engage in leadership, and conventionally that's where we've stopped. But I think there's an advantage for leaders when there is decent eldership available to them. We put a great emphasis, particularly in education, on school leaders. And they can often feel quite isolated because there isn't a realm of eldership for them to lean into. So my hope, and what I feel now is some of my focus, is to develop eldership within education.